Welcome to Grove Bites. I'm Richard Steele. My guest today is Stephen Hance. Stephen is the National Lead for Evangelism and Witness for the Church of England, and he's the author of the Grove book, Seeing Ourselves as Others See Us, Perceptions of the Church of England. Welcome, Stephen.
Great to be with you, Richard.
Stephen, you've got four key findings in your book as to how the general public do see the Church of England. And the first one of those is benign indifference. Now, that doesn't sound the greatest of starts to me.
Well, yes, I mean, I can see that that's the case. However, it is, first of all, it is what people have said. And I think that, you know, we sometimes make the mistake of those of us who live our lives in the Church of England bubble of thinking that other people think about us perhaps rather more than they do. I think what my research indicates is that for a very large proportion of our population, they think about the Church of England very little at all. And although you say that's not a great start, in a way, it does at least tell us where we need to begin. And where we need to begin is building the links and the relationships and looking for ways to make ourselves relevant and engaging with people who don't necessarily feel that they need to give us the time of day or pay any attention to what we do. So we have to create that relationship, is what I'm saying, rather than simply assuming that it's there. So actually, it may not be particularly good news, but it is at least a spur to action. And maybe more positively, sometimes we can feel that we live in a world where people are quite hostile to the church and to the Christian faith. That hasn't come across in my research, really. It is indifference far more than hostility that I think that we encounter amongst those who don't presently come to church for worship or for anything else very much.
And you said your research, and you've also looked back at other research papers the last few years and how the media report the church, which is always interesting. And this is part of the Church of England's work to set a new vision and strategy, isn't it, for the next 10 years? So I guess from what you said, you would say it's very important to have a clear-eyed, you might almost see sort of warts and all view of how people perceive the church. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I was asked to do this for exactly the reason that you said, Richard. The Church of England was doing the vision strategy piece, and somebody somewhere, I don't know who, said it would be really good to have a clear understanding of how we're perceived. So I started off as a sociologist, so I rather enjoyed this kind of work. And so I did a trawl back through all the research that I could find, which had been done on the Church of England or the church more broadly in this country over the preceding 5 years. I looked at all the media coverage of the Church of England over the preceding couple of years. And I conducted 5 roundtables with all sorts of people, some household names, lots of people you wouldn't know, mix of church people and non-church people, but primarily non-church people, to hear what they had to say about the church. And I think that the key thing is that in order to decide where you're going to go, and how you're going to get there, you need to have a sense of where you are. And so really what I'm trying to do with this little book is to say, this is where we are. Better or worse, may like it, may not like it, but in a sense, it doesn't really matter. It's where we are. So this is where we start in terms of thinking about our mission and our engagement with our communities, and from which we build going forward as we seek to see the vision strategy come to life.
You do, though, also say that although most people, for the Church of England is there part of the background of the culture, some people are actually actively hostile to the church, and particularly younger people. Does that concern you in your role within the Church of England, or how much does it concern you?
Well, it concerns me enormously, of course. And, the reality, I think, and the research does underline this, is that for some people, and you rightly say, Richard, primarily younger people, but not exclusively, they look at the church's record on inclusion and social justice. They in terms of women in leadership, not so many years ago, in terms of LGBTQI issues now, in terms of racial justice issues, Black Lives Matter type stuff now as well. And they say, this is not a just organization. This is not a community of people that looks like the world to which we belong. And so there is something for the church to do here, and I don't think I'm telling anybody anything that we don't know, but we need to understand anyway what the impact is of how the church's positions on some of these questions in the past, if not in the present day, how that impact is felt, and it does function as a barrier for many younger, should we say, more liberally minded people to look at the church as a source of uh, spiritual guidance, encouragement, a place where they might explore their own faith lives.
So we're back in that old thing, maybe sort of spiritual but not religious, and I think you feel that quite a lot of people would fall into that category. And how does the Church of England begin to address that kind of grouping, where the Church of England will be seen as very religious? How do we begin to respond to that?
I think one of the things which struck me most profoundly when I was doing this work was the fact that many people don't see the Church of England as having all that much to do with God. And I think we are in a culture where people may not be great fans of organized religion. That's not necessarily terminology I would use, but that's the terminology which is out there. But they are interested in God. They're interested in prayer. They're interested in whether there is any more to life than this, whether there's an afterlife, and all of these kind of things. Part of our problem is that people don't really associate those questions with the Church of England all that much. And one of the key findings of my report is that we are seen as being embarrassed about God. We don't talk about God all that much. And that's true at a local and at a national level. There's this wonderful quote. I think it's Evelyn Underhill, and I'm probably not getting it exactly right, but she says something like, the only thing that's really interesting about religion is God. And I think we need to recover our confidence that that is true and be willing to talk about God at a local, but also into the national space more than we do. Now, I don't underestimate how difficult that could be and how countercultural it can be. But if I can put flesh on the bones of it, for example, a local church which is running a food bank, toddler group, all of these wonderful things, and local people are participating, they're benefiting, and they say, why are you doing all of this? What kind of answer do the people from the church who are running that activity feel equipped to give? If it's just an answer that says, we want to be part of it, we're serving this community, we're here for everybody, okay, that's fine. But I'd want to get us to a place where actually all of us were able to answer a question like that with some sort of reference to God, to what Jesus has commanded of us. And I suspect that in very many places at the moment, that's not the kind of answer you would get.
You make quite a bit about the local church. In fact, one of your chapters is called, "Local Trumps National," doesn't it? So, if you've got a good local church, what the church does nationally doesn't matter quite so much. Are you really invested in the local church in that way?
I think that what comes out of the research is that local is the most important, national is the second most important in terms of people's perceptions. I'm sorry to say that diocesan doesn't come out very strongly at all. Quite a lot of non-church people said to me, oh, the church is really good in our area, we've got a really lovely vicar, or the opposite, I'm afraid. Nobody said to me, the church is really good in our area, we've got a wonderfully dynamic bishop. So I think local does trump national, and national trumps regional or diocesan. And one of the things I think we need to pay attention to is that people in a community have long memories. A friend of mine became a vicar in a kind of outer London, rather prosperous suburb quite a long time ago. And this was a church where the previous vicar was just known locally for being quite grumpy. He's grumpy about people. If you went to him for a wedding or a funeral, he's quite grumpy about choices of music and the right kind of language to use in prayers and all of these kind of things. And so in that community, the church just had a reputation for being grumpy. And it will have taken a long time for that reputation to be shaken. And I think when people know that, when they've heard that on the grapevine from friends or neighbors, that does really carry power. The good thing about that is that when we do the opposite, when we're friendly, when we're welcoming, when we take time to get to know each other, to get to know people in our community, when we don't correct their language, when we're happy to go along with, their desires for music, or for, how a wedding service or a funeral service should be held, or whatever, we can quite easily get a reputation for being friendly, welcoming, inclusive. I don't think we understand how nervous most non-church people are about approaching the church for something. So anything and everything that we can do that takes down those barriers and makes us appear welcoming, inclusive, here to serve, really counts for a lot. And in a local community, that is probably the thing which is going to affect people's perception of the church more than anything else.
Your book includes quite a lot of points for reflection and questions, and you actually conclude with 10 trends and 10 questions for the church. And obviously, as a church, you're centrally involved in helping to steer. It does sound like there are many challenges from what you've been saying and from what I've read.
Well, I think there are many challenges, really, and I don't think anything that's happened in the last 18 months with COVID has reduced those challenges at all. But I don't think either that they are challenges that ought to be taking us by surprise. I mean, the big trends of a diminishing local fringe, of fewer and fewer people counting themselves as nominal members of the Church of England, of aging congregations in many places, those trends have been there for decades. And what the pandemic has done is to exacerbate all of them. We've kind of moved another 10 years down the field in the space of a year and a half. But we should have been, and in lots of places we have been, thinking about those trends before. So I think, the real challenge is this: do we find a way to continue to think of ourselves as the people of God, called for this place, this day and age, reliant on the leadership and the empowering of the Holy Spirit to serve our nation with the good news of Jesus? Because if we can come at things from that perspective, anything remains possible. That is the priority, rather than, buildings and particular orders of ministry and so on, important and valuable though they are. And if we can get hold of that vision, then the future could be exciting and creative. If we commit ourselves to simply trying to sustain the institution as we've inherited it, with as little change as possible for as long as possible, well, I fear the tides of history are rather running against us. So I think it is a challenging time, but I don't think it is a hopeless time. And actually, I think for Christians, it's never a hopeless time. The key question always comes down to, what is God doing in this moment? And how do we, as people who call ourselves followers of Jesus, engage with what we see God doing in the world around us? And if we can approach the challenges through that mindset, then, the future could be beautiful, different, but beautiful.
To get a copy of Stephen's book, go to the Grove Books website, where you can order Seeing Ourselves as Others See Us as a print copy with free postage, or as a PDF. There are many more great Grove books applying the Bible to a wide variety of situations. They're written by authors who know what they're writing about. Grove Books are bite-sized publications that you can really get your teeth into. Goodbye for now. Hope to see you again soon.